The United States does not tolerate left-leaning governments either in South America or Central America. And as soon as they see a government that they think is considerably to the left of center, we move in to replace that government. We have a rich history of doing this. And ever since Chavez won in Venezuela a decade or so ago, the United States has had its gun sights on Venezuela and nothing has changed. We want to get rid of Maduro and we would prefer to put in place a right-wing government. If you have any doubts about this, all you have to do is look at our relationship with Cuba since 1959 when Fidel Castro took over there. We've had our gun sights on Cuba ever since. We cannot stand the fact that Cuba has a government that is to the left of center. In simple terms, he's saying the quiet part out loud. Washington still treats Latin America like its ideological property. Whenever a government drifts left, the U.S. tries to replace it, Cuba in '59, Venezuela under Chavez, and now Maduro. But here's the irony. This isn't about democracy. It's about control, resources, influence, and keeping the region aligned with Washington. And that's why nothing changes. The Cold War ended, but the mindset didn't. Does Venezuela pose any threat to the United States whatsoever? No, not in my opinion. There are a lot of people, though, who think it's an ideological threat. In other words, they believe that we're in such a precarious position in the Western Hemisphere and maybe around the world as well that if there is a left-wing government in this hemisphere, even if that left-wing government is not courting with a distant great power like the Soviet Union, the mere fact that there is a left-wing government in this hemisphere is categorically unacceptable. In simple terms, Venezuela isn't a threat to the U.S. at all. The danger is ideological, not military. Some policymakers still think that any left-wing government in the Western Hemisphere, even a peaceful one, is unacceptable by default. This is Cold War thinking on autopilot. The fear isn't about weapons or alliances. It's about the idea that a country in America's backyard might choose a different political model. And we go after it hammer and tongue almost every time. So the people of a country democratically choose their leaders like Lula in Brazil, a hard-left guy but a very prosperous country with a major economic base. Venezuela not prosperous but potentially so. We're going to use force to change their government. It sounds like Afghanistan, doesn't it? Look, we do not believe in sovereignty. It's just very important to recognize that the United States thinks it has the right, it has the responsibility, and it has the capability to intervene in the domestic politics of every country on the planet when it sees fit. This is the way we operate. This is a gross violation of the UN Charter. And everybody understands that if you violate sovereignty all the time, you make for a much less peaceful world. But that doesn't matter to us because we're interested in remaking the world in our own image. In simple terms, he's saying the U.S. supports democracy only when it delivers the right winner. If a country elects someone Washington dislikes, intervention suddenly becomes an option. And that's the real issue. Sovereignty isn't respected. It's overridden. Is it lawful for the President of the United States to order the United States military to kill unarmed civilians who are not engaged in violence on their speedboats in the Caribbean because he thinks they're drug dealers? I do not think it is. And there are lots of other people who don't think it is either, including British military intelligence MI6. As you know, the British are not cooperating with us. This is the British, right? Our buddies. But MI6 will not cooperate with us in the Caribbean because they fully understand that what we're doing is unlawful. It's murderous behavior. And President Trump can say that he has some sort of written mandate to do this which says it's okay. But hardly anybody believes that except for the people around him and his fervent supporters of the body populace. In simple terms, he's saying this: ordering the military to kill unarmed civilians isn't legal, no matter what justification you attach to it. And the proof is in the reaction. Even close allies like Britain won't cooperate because they see it for what it is, unlawful and dangerous. When your own partners step back, that's a sign the line has been crossed. The implication here is that there are thousands of orders that are given every week, and a huge chunk of those orders are going to be illegal orders, and you're going to have insurrection in the ranks. You're going to have chaos in the ranks. I don't think that's the way this works. I think that every once in a while you'll get an order that is clearly illegal. People understand that, and they can question that order. And if the person up on top, the commander who issued the order, has a good explanation for what's going on, he or she can give that to the subordinate who is asking whether the order is illegal or not. In simple terms, he's saying illegal orders aren't routine. They're rare, and everyone in the chain of command knows when something crosses the line. When that happens, soldiers can question it and the burden shifts back to the commander to justify it. It's not chaos in the ranks. It's basic accountability. Why would the Kremlin entertain peace negotiations now? Because it looks like they're going to get everything they want in the peace negotiations. You want to think about what's happening here. This war, apropos what you were saying, is being won on the battlefield by the Russians, and the Americans recognize this, and as a consequence the Americans are willing to cave to almost all of Russia's demands as best we can tell. Now, whether the Ukrainians and the Europeans ultimately cave is another matter, but the United States is just facing up to reality given what's happening on the battlefield, given the fact that there are a number of other problems that the Ukrainian government is facing. One of which is that the United States is not funding Ukraine anymore, and that the Europeans can't come up with the cash to fund Ukraine. And given the fact that there's this major corruption crisis that is undermining Zelensky's standing in Kiev. And given the fact that Russian aircraft, Russian cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and drones are destroying infrastructure in Ukraine. Given all those factors, the writing's on the wall, and the Americans saying now is time to cut a deal. And they're willing to cut a deal, the Americans are. That gives the Russians pretty much everything they want as best I can tell from what you read about the deal in the paper. In simple terms, he's saying Russia has no reason to rush because the battlefield is already giving them what negotiations would. With US funding gone, Europe unable to pay, corruption scandals in Kiev and Russian strikes crippling Ukraine's infrastructure, the balance has shifted and Washington sees it. That's why they're suddenly open to a deal that gives Moscow almost everything it wanted from the start. When the writing is on the wall, diplomacy becomes surrender dressed as strategy. Can the corrupt hold over President Zelensky enter into an agreement that peacefully cedes territory to Russia without exposing himself to elimination by the Banderists, the hardcore nationalists that have surrounded him since the beginning of his presidency? Well, I put it in more general terms. I find it hard to imagine anybody in Ukraine surrendering to these terms. I mean, you want to understand that the Ukrainians are going to have to give up lots of territory to Russia. Furthermore, they're going to have to, according to newspaper reports, have the size of their military, in other words, cut their military in half. They're not going to be allowed to deploy certain weapons that can hit Russia, for example. There are going to be real limits on the amount of assistance the West can give to Ukraine, and here we're talking about military assistance. There's nothing in the newspapers about Ukraine being in NATO, but it has to be the case that Ukraine can't be in NATO and can't have meaningful security guarantees from the West. So, I think the Russians are going to get all of their principal demands. Does Secretary of State/N Security Advisor Marco Rubio want peace in Ukraine, or does he belong to the Victoria Nuland school of let's use Ukraine as a battering ram with which to drive Vladimir Putin from office? Well, I think Rubio in his heart of hearts wants peace, but he wants peace on Ukraine's terms, or the terms that the neoconservatives, people like Victoria Nuland, have been pushing forward. He's a hawk for sure in his heart and in his head as well, I'm sure. But the fact is that the Ukrainians are losing. There's nothing that can be done to rescue the situation. And Donald Trump, not Marco Rubio, is the President of the United States. And Trump wants to cut a deal. He's had enough of this. Trump recognizes that Ukraine can't win the war. The Russians are winning the war and they're about to knock out the Ukrainians. Put simply, the peace deal Russia wants is political suicide for any Ukrainian leader. It requires giving up land, cutting the military, accepting strict weapon limits, and dropping NATO entirely. So even if the US is ready to settle, Kiev is trapped. The cost of agreeing could be just as dangerous as continuing the war. Why are the Israelis so happy at this proposal? Probably because they wrote it. Well, they wrote it, but it's also ideal from their point of view. I mean, this UN resolution which incorporates President Trump's 20-point plan is a travesty. It's disgraceful. First of all, with regard to the Palestinians, there's no self-determination in there. It's not like the Palestinians are going to get a state of their own, or they're going to have any say on how Gaza is administered. And furthermore, if you look at who's going to be in charge in Gaza as a result of this UN resolution, it's the United States and Israel. And this is the tag team that's been perpetrating a genocide since October of 2023. So in other words, what you're doing is you're taking the two principal perpetrators of the genocide, the United States and Israel, and you're putting them in charge. And by the way, you're creating this board of peace that is going to run things. is going to be the supreme decision maker in Gaza. And who is the head of this board of peace? Donald Trump. This is hard to believe. And then we're going to bring in an international stabilization force. I doubt that international stabilization force will ever go in there because Hamas has said that it's not going to disarm. And it's hard to believe that that stabilization force will go in there with the principal mission in mind of disarming Hamas and doing Israel's dirty work for it. Simply put, Israel likes this plan because it's built around their interests. The Palestinians get no real state, no control, and no say in Gaza's future. And the shocking part, the US and Israel, accused of the destruction, are put in charge of managing Gaza with Trump heading the so-called peace board. It's not a peace plan, it's a power plan. I just find that hard to imagine. So this just makes no sense at all. I'm shocked that the resolution was not vetoed by the Russians and the Chinese, and I'm shocked that the resolution was enthusiastically supported by all these countries in the Arab and Islamic world. You would think that given the extent to which the Palestinians are being screwed as a result of this resolution, and that's being screwed after 2 years undergoing a genocide, that these people in the Arab and Islamic world or these leaders in the Arab and Islamic world would see fit to oppose the resolution and try to create a new resolution. And this is what the Russians wanted to do, by the way, create a new resolution that led to some sort of self-determination, some sort of meaningful political horizon for the Palestinians and didn't cater to the Israelis and the Americans, but that didn't happen. Is Netanyahu happy about the extraordinary reception that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, received in Washington, D.C. this week? I don't think he was wildly enthusiastic about it. I don't think the Israelis are happy with the fact that we've agreed to give the Saudis F-35s. But the Saudis are not a problem for Israel. The Gulf states are not a problem for Israel. The Israelis worry more about places like Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and Jordan. Those are the principal concerns. And of course, Iran. That almost goes without saying. But the Saudis don't matter that much. As you know, the big talk for the past 2 or 3 years has been whether or not you're going to get an Abraham Accord involving Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Israel. And the fact that that conversation was taking place just tells you that the Saudis are not a major problem for the Israelis unless they get sophisticated F-35s. That'll make the Israelis very nervous. But that game hasn't played out yet. And the Israelis will go to great lengths to undermine that deal. And if they don't undermine it, they'll make sure they get compensated in the extreme in terms of more and more weaponry and more money simply because we gave Saudi Arabia 48 F-35s. In simple terms, he's saying the whole situation makes no sense. A plan that sidelines Palestinians was backed by countries that should have rejected it, and even Russia and China didn't block it. And on top of that, regional politics are shifting in ways Israel doesn't fully like, especially with Saudi Arabia's growing ties to Washington. The bottom line, everyone is playing their own strategic game, and the Palestinians are the ones left without a voice. Like, share, and subscribe this channel for daily updates, and don't forget to press the bell icon.